Take 3. Be funny if this was the take that's immortalized, and take 3 is how it starts. The most popular video on this channel for views is the odds of any NHL team being moved. I don't agree that it's my best video. I wouldn't even put it in the top 10. But hey, it's the number 1 video for views. And number 2, and the best performing monetarily, is the video where I discuss attendance 10 years ago versus now. And then we get into power rankings basically being the biggest videos for the most part. But there's one video that stands out, and that's my 1 through 30 favorite teams. But that's from last February. The channel's changed, the set's changed, and yet that video's got 44,000 views at last I looked this morning. And it's still performing, meaning people every month, there's about 1,000 views that thing gets. And it bothers me in that my favorite teams do change. Not the ones at the very top and not usually the ones at the very bottom, but the ones in the middle will change. And even during the season, they may move based on that underdog role. And you'll see that, and I'll go through that as I do this countdown, that I'm a huge fan of underdogs for the most part. Number 31, Montreal. No surprise to anybody, Montreal's number 31. Anybody who follows this channel at all could have said right off the bat, well, 31's Montreal, and they'd be right. The Montreal Canadiens are a team that I don't cheer for. I don't cheer for them because I cheer for Boston. Boston fans are not really allowed to cheer for Montreal. So as a result, I don't cheer for Montreal. I can't. I physically can't. Number 30, meaning this team I would cheer for against Montreal, and that's Pittsburgh. The Penguins at 30, that's not going to surprise anybody either. It's not. The Penguins have had a nice long dive to this level where I don't want to see them win again. They've won twice in a row. I don't want to see them win another Stanley Cup. It's right at the top of the list of things I don't want to see happen. Other things I don't want to see happen are things we're going to see happen at the draft lottery in a few weeks, which is my favorite teams not winning the draft lottery. Although last year, technically, Dallas kind of won the draft lottery, getting that number 3 pick, and people are still raging about that. And number 29, Kings. I've never been a Kings fan. I mean, technically, 30 through 28 used to be California. So they're moving up. And I could see a situation where I'm cheering for LA in the playoffs, for instance, the Stanley Cup final between them and Pittsburgh. I'd be a huge Kings fan for that 2 weeks. And there are players that I like on the Kings. I like Kopitar. I like Jonathan Quick a lot. He's one of my favorite goaltenders. But the team as a whole, they're not a team that I really readily cheer for. Number 28, and this won't surprise anybody either, staying in California, and it's the Sharks. What is there to say other than I'm not a huge fan of California teams, and I get asked about this, so I'll answer this on here. The Vancouver Canucks have a very poor record against San Jose and LA. Boston, poor record against Montreal, huge rival, and against Pittsburgh in the playoffs. A couple of times there that it ended in failure. The most recent time it was a sweep for Boston, and it was glorious. I was a huge fan of that one. But yeah, San Jose at 28. As I said though, they're not at 30. They're not at 31, so it's better than it's been. 27, and these guys have just taken a nosedive this year, in my eyes. And it's not just that they've fallen out of the playoffs that necessarily makes a difference. It's just the feeling that there's issues in that dressing room. There's issues with the team. And the Flames have a large feud with the Vancouver Canucks that has gone on for decades. And I'm, if you, one thing that you'll notice is Pacific. Division rivals to the Canucks are teams that I'm not naturally going to be cheering for. It'd be hard for me to cheer for them. Much like if you ask a Philly fan why does he hate Pittsburgh, and his answer is going to be, why is water wet? It just is. And And then, of course, some scientist will come in and start telling you why water's wet, and you tell him he's a prick. But yeah, so Pacific Division teams, they're teams that are going to be challenged for me to cheer for them under most circumstances. Number 26. And this is just frustration. Absolute sheer frustration for me watching them this year. One thing about having the center ice package and being able to watch every game this year and not having to miss games like I did last year when I had a job where I had to work at 4 in the morning, I've been able to see a lot more hockey, and the Islanders have been hurt by that. Man, this team's in trouble. And it's when you're watching all 31 teams, you can really get behind a team that seems to have some form of direction or idea of what they're doing. And other than finding a decent permanent home for the team and finally deciding that, Nassau we weren't drawing, but we were drawing better than we're drawing in Brooklyn, it's been an absolute destructive year for anything and everything related to the Islanders. That's why they're where they are. Number 25. I mentioned Edmonton. And I want to point this out now. Montreal last won the Stanley Cup in 1993. Pittsburgh won it in 2017. LA won it in 2014. San Jose hasn't won it, but they've been in the final. Calgary won it in 1989. The Islanders won it in 1983. And the Oilers last won it in 1990. This is part of that underdog thing I'm talking about. So I want to point that out now, that a lot of these teams are teams that have been to the top of the mountain and they've won and they've been there. The only exception being San Jose. And I tend to cheer for underdogs. So even though you may look at some of these teams and say, well, they're underdogs now. Yes, but I'm old enough to be an old fart and remember these teams beating teams I cheered for. 82 against the Canucks. 89. The Flames knocked out the Canucks on the way to the Cup that year. The Oilers beat up on Vancouver the whole 80s. The Kings in 2012 knocked out the Canucks. And yeah, that was in the first round that year. That was the year that the Canucks had the President's Trophy and lost it in 5. 2017, of course, Pittsburgh has been beating everybody. And Montreal knocked out Boston. At least one of those times that Patrick Roy had a Stanley Cup. And it's been mostly just a minefield for Boston fans. So, all right, so that out of the way, we'll get to number 24, and that's Chicago. So we're into that area where you can say, well, so do you really hate these teams? No, not really. And of course, Chicago last won a Stanley Cup in 2015. This isn't a matter of me hating Chicago or not cheering when they score, because look, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams that when they're playing against, I'm cheering for. I'm probably ahead of most Canuck fans on this one. I am probably there are a lot of Canuck fans who still, based on the Stanley Cup playoffs and Chelsea dagger being something they hate so much, just can't bring themselves to cheer for Chicago. I'm okay with it, and under certain circumstances in the playoffs, I pull for them too. But again, it comes down to that underdog thing. At 23, and honestly, Arizona's helped their case a lot. If I had done this, say, a month and a half ago, I don't know where Arizona finishes. Probably 26th, I would think. Arizona's kind of fun to watch, and that's kind of what it comes down to when you're not in teams that you actively dislike. And in terms of actively dislike, there's just Pittsburgh and Montreal for me. Actively dislike is not something I have with the Kings anymore or San Jose. And again, it comes down to the fact that I'm watching all of these teams all the time. So Arizona, and there's a team that has never won anything, whether it was when they were in Winnipeg or now. Let's clean off the board. I told you guys you were going to get a lot more of an explanation this time. Number 22, Detroit. Now, Detroit's moved up. If I had done this countdown years and years ago, Detroit would have been much further down. And, of course, Detroit last won the Stanley Cup in 2008. That's hard to see. I'm going to keep using black, because that's hard to see. 2008. They're 22. Detroit, I'm encouraged by Some of the signs I've seen with the team down the stretch, even though that's not showing up in terms of wins. There are certain players in Detroit that I really like. I like Larkin. I didn't like him last year, but I like him this year. It's admirable Zetterberg's been able to keep things going relatively well considering the team around him. Even though they traded off Tatar, I still like some of that core. I'm not a big fan of Nyquist, but um, we'll see what happens with Nyquist going forward. I think he's the next one to go. Honestly, I do. I think he's the next one to go. 21. Buffalo's a hard team to cheer for, and I'm going to explain why. And obviously, they've never won the Stanley Cup. Buffalo's a hard team to cheer for because they've lost a lot over the last 5 years, and they haven't shown a whole lot of upward momentum. You can cheer for a team that's down and out for a little while. It is really hard to pull for a team that's down and out for this long. And I understand Oilers fans are like, tell me about it. I know. And Canucks fans are like, wait a minute, did you just say that? Yeah, I did. I'm not saying that Vancouver's been unseated as number one, but stay tuned because I have stuff to talk about with that. Buffalo is at 21 because I still I cheer for them when I watch them play quite a bit, but I can't emotionally invest myself in them because I don't see a lot of hope going forward. And I know that sounds depressing, and I apologize for that. At number 20, Rangers. The Rangers would be higher up if not for 1994, and I'm going to be completely honest about that. That Stanley Cup final has made it hard to cheer for the New York Rangers as a Vancouver Canucks fan. So they last won it in 1994. Great for Ranger fans, and for those of you old enough to have been around and celebrated it, I'm sure it was amazing. But as a Canuck fan, it was hard, and they would have been 30 at that point, and there weren't 30 teams in the NHL. I just would have added a bunch of empty spaces and put them as far away from the other teams as possible. I hated the Rangers, so my opinions do change over the years. They do evolve and change, and the Rangers at 20. There's a lot of players that I like on the Rangers right now. And we'll see if they move up, but we're getting to the biggest mover. And I know there's a fan base out there that's like, wait, you forgot us. No, I didn't. Yeah, let that sink in. Let that sink in. So, in 2007, the Anaheim Ducks were easily the most hated team for me, and I know they're the most hated team for a lot of people. And that for them going from 30 last year, or I think they may have been 29. They may have been ahead of Montreal. I know it was Montreal and Anaheim. Throw a coin in the air, and whichever one heads Montreal, tails it's Anaheim. It doesn't matter. You hate them both. The Ducks this year have impressed me, and there's a lot of young players I like. I still don't like Corey Perry. I still don't like Ryan Kessler, but I like John Gibson. I like their defense. I like Andre Kasha. There's a lot to like with the Ducks right now. And I know there's dirty players, and there's players I can't stand. And in a 7-game series, I would absolutely likely turn against them watching them in a playoff series, because that's when the really dirty play for Kessler and Perry tends to get ratcheted up. But I gotta say, during games right now, I've been cheering every now and then when the Ducks score, and it threw Yvonne off the other night when I cheered. She's like, "Wait, did you just cheer the Ducks?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think I did." And you feel kind of dirty and wrong, but it happened. It happened. At number 18, oh man, Philly. Philly's usually around the middle. I believe their last Stanley Cup was 1976. I'm too young to really remember the last Stanley Cup. I was around, but I didn't watch hockey. At the time I came into hockey was the end of the Broad Street Bullies. Again, the Flyers are a team that there's parts I like about it. It's frustrating because it seems like they always have a goaltending controversy. There's always something wrong in Philly. They're always almost good enough. And I'm remembering back to some of the seasons in the 90s, definitely during the Legion of Doom era. They were right on the cusp, and it just never quite happened. Now, the funny thing is, during the Eric Lindros era, I like them as much as I liked the Ducks last year. I couldn't stand the Flyers with Lindros. Was not a Lindros fan. I'm more of a Lindros fan now in his retirement than I was when he played. At 17, and I realize this team's dropped quite a bit. It's Carolina. I'm just mad. Um, I had really hoped that Carolina would do it this year. Get to the playoffs. They won the Stanley Cup in 2006, and I cheered when they won that Stanley Cup. Notice the Oilers are way down, and Carolina's around the middle. Carolina would have been higher up then, because they were the former Whalers. And it's weird because the Whalers was always a team I cheered for. This is absolute sheer frustration that's got me watching games now. Like, you know what? I hope they lose. I just do. This is it's frustration, and it's hard. It's a lot like Buffalo. It's really hard for me to watch their games and get into it, because at the start of the year I was like, all right, they're gonna do it. This is the year, and then no. At 16, it's not the Devils versus everybody, because if you're gonna say NJD versus everybody with that hashtag, the problem with that is I have the Devils right smack dab in the middle. They last won the Cup in 2003. They're at 16 on the list. The Devils would have been lower in '95 when they were Stanley Cup champions. Notice there's a there's a path that every team follows. They're champs. Shannon can't stand them. But New Jersey, I like their young core. I like a lot of what they're doing. I think they're on the verge of a big breakthrough next year. I try to see the big picture with this, and I think New Jersey and Philly next year, I think it's going to be a very good year for them. But for Philly, again, how do they fix the goaltending issue? New Jersey doesn't really have a goaltending issue right now. Not yet. If Kincaid plays really well and they get in the playoffs, and if Kincaid's the starter, we may have a goaltending controversy going into next season. But for right now, we don't. New Jersey's in pretty good shape there. At 15, so now we're officially ahead of the curve here, and we're at St. Louis. St. Louis, two springs ago when they were against San Jose, I really wanted them to knock out San Jose. So I've been in the corner of the Blues before, and I can get there again. If you look at this by conference, this shows I'd be cheering for them against the Ducks. But, St. Louis, we're in that middle. We're in that middle where I kind of cheer for and I kind of don't. And it depends who they're playing. At 14, 14, Columbus. The Blue Jackets obviously never won the Stanley Cup, never been out of a round. I'd like to see them do it this year. Obviously, if they're against Pittsburgh, I'm cheering for them against Pittsburgh. If they're against Washington, I don't know. That's an awfully American-looking series, and I'm not sure which team I'm cheering for. Maybe Columbus, but it's hard to say, because notice, Washington hasn't got on the board yet. Washington's not there yet. We're up to 14. During the winning streak, I was very impressed with Columbus. It didn't move them up or down the listing in my mind, though. So another fan base is going to be like, wait, he forgot all about us. No. Toronto's at 13. If you go back to the first time that I ever did this, I believe Toronto was very, very near the bottom. I know Anaheim, Montreal, LA, San Jose, and Toronto were the teams at the bottom. And obviously there's been some movement. Toronto, really it started last year. Last year, at the start of the season, I just thought they were so much fun to watch. And I was telling people on the channel, like, you guys be watching the Leafs. They're actually fun to watch this year. And people are like, you kidding me? They're not even in the playoffs. We watched the Leafs for you. You're just jumping on a bandwagon. No, and I still say that. And I've defended Mitch Marner all year, too. And now, look, Marner's their best player. So, I'm a huge Mitch Marner fan. I am a large fan of Freddie Anderson's as well. Anybody who might be a polarizing figure with Leaf fans, I'm going to probably pull for. I'm not a huge Austin Matthews fan. I think he's overblown. I think there's a lot of pressure on him. But I do like all the other pieces with that team. I do. Number 12. If you had told me 5 years ago that I would have Colorado at 12th place, I would have told you were insane. Colorado, again, when they were champs, when they were really good, I couldn't stand them. And right up until really what they've done this year. And again, these don't matter if they make the playoffs or they don't. That's not the point for me to cheer for a team. It doesn't matter if they make the playoffs or not, which is good because a lot of the teams I like aren't making the playoffs. But, the Avs have played admirably well this year. And they've done it right out of the gate. And right at the start of the year, I said, these guys are playing really well. And I had people saying, well, they played really well at the start of last year too. So I went and I looked and I thought, yeah, they did, but this feels different. This feels more sustainable. And so far it has been. And I'm very impressed with what the team's done. At number 11, Vegas. So obviously making their debut on the countdown is Vegas. Now what's weird, obviously they never won a Stanley Cup, so they get an asterisk. The odd part is that that I would cheer for Vegas at all at this point. Usually when it's a team's first season, unless I have some real reason to cheer for them, like the Ottawa Senators when they came in, I've got family in that area. I kind of adopted the team a bit. That was one of the worst expansion teams in history. You're welcome. Vegas, I do feel some connection with it. I know there's a lot of subscribers to this channel that are Vegas fans. I would definitely be pulling for Vegas against any of these teams. The fact that Vegas, after their first year, is a team I would pull for against anybody outside of the top 10 teams in the league, for me, my 10 favorites, is kind of insane. And there's definitely room there for me to get more of an attachment to Vegas. If they go on a run in the playoffs, and if it's not going through teams I cheer for, then absolutely Vegas at this time next year could end up a lot higher on the countdown. But I got to pause and clean the board again. Okay, so with bated breath, I'm sure all of you are anxiously waiting to see where everybody falls in the top 10. And there are some teams that have moved up, including number 10, Minnesota. Definitely part and parcel of having the NHL channels. Part and parcel of watching hockey every night is you start rooting for underdogs. Minnesota's an underdog. Notice the asterisk never won a Stanley Cup. Be nice to see them win something. And there's a lot of good stories here. I think when Minnesota was still just treading water and they had all those injuries, and then everybody came back, and I'm like, they're going to play better. And I had faith in them, even when some Minnesota fans were like, nah, this season's probably a dud. I've really pulled for them in a lot of games lately, which is kind of fun. And it's different because Minnesota is a team that I've been very slow to adopt. Very, very slow. Remember when they got the expansion team, I was like, yeah, Minnesota, awesome, they're back. But I don't know, this organization is not the Stars, and it just, I had a hard time pulling for them. And I'm getting there, but it's taking time. At number 9, Tampa. Now, I'm pretty sure, and I didn't go back and rewatch the video from last year because I think it becomes less honest if I go back and I go, oh, wait, I had that team there last year. I have to change that. But I have a funny feeling that Tampa was higher up last year. Notice they're the number 1 team in the East right now. At the time I'm recording this, the number 1 team in the East, and they've dropped from where I had them last year. It's not a coincidence. It is my desire to see an underdog win, which is also part of the reason why teams I cheer for almost never win. And Tampa hasn't done anything wrong. They've got all kinds of players I really, really like. But there's 8 teams in the league that if they beat them in the playoffs, I'd be all excited about it. And it's a shame. And number 8 is the ultimate example of that, and that's Florida. If we're talking about teams that I actually actively cheer for, yeah, we're there. The top 9 are teams that I would say more often than not when I watch them, I cheer when they score. And I'm happy when they score. Minnesota, I'm getting there. Florida, I'm absolutely there. I'm kind of keeping myself braced because Florida, ever since '96, ever since that run to the Stanley Cup final, it has been almost good enough, almost playoffs, almost winning a round, almost over the hump. They never quite get there. So do I fully expect them to reach the playoffs? There's a part of my brain that says they're not going to do it. They're just not going to do it. Just give up. Just forget about it. Just forget about it. It's not going to happen. But at the same time, I've become a much bigger fan of Florida over the last year for what they've done. Even though giving up Marchessault and Riley Smith, I think, was a huge mistake, I still think Florida's pretty good going forward because they've got some of the best young players in the league. And they lack depth in some areas, but you know what? It's all right. What's done is done, and you go forward. At number 7, it's Nashville country. The run to the Stanley Cup final last year, Leaves them with an asterisk because they've never won a Stanley Cup. But notice, no cup, one, and none. This is my problem. It is easier for me to pull for a team that's never won anything. Because I want to see that first championship. Let's see it. Let's do it. So much fun to see a team win its first championship. Or first championship in quite a while. That's entertaining too, unless it's the Rangers in 1994. Guys denied my Canucks their rightful Stanley Cup claim. But Nashville, I think, was higher last year. Again, I'm not going back and checking. Number 6, Washington. Yeah, I don't know. This one's been changing during the season. And I know how foolish it is to cheer for Washington. I know how foolish it is come playoff time to be like, I want them to do it this year. I know. But I'm there again. And it kind of hurts. But there's a part of me saying, if Washington can just win a round, maybe they can get over the hump in that second round. Yeah, it'll be Pittsburgh again, and we know how that turns out. Number 5. This is what I call the Yvonne effect. I know the Jets weren't this high on my list last year, but with a family around me cheering for Jets, go Jets, let's go Jets. How about we get you a Jets jersey? Do you need more Jets stuff? I'll make you Jets pajamas. How about a Jets hat? You ordered a jersey, I'm not happy. Oh, it's Jets, it's okay. It kind of sort of seeps into your brain just a little bit. And I got to admit that I thought about this, and I had the list out today, and I was like, all right, I had Nashville at 5 and Winnipeg at 7, and I thought, I really don't know that I would cheer for Nashville over Washington or Winnipeg, because that would be Washington in a Stanley Cup final against Nashville. That would be kind of amazing as a Stanley Cup final, first off. And secondly, it would be impossible for me not to pull for Washington, because it would feel like Nashville could get back there again with that defense, but not Washington. This is their last chance. And we said that last year too. Anyways, so yeah, Winnipeg gets number 5. They bounced up to number 5. Number 4, I don't know. They've never won the Stanley Cup. They made the final once. They're going nowhere. But I still want to see Ottawa succeed. I've been cheering for them to lose because I'd like to see them get a really good draft pick. I want to see their prospects work out. At number 3 is this team. 1999, last time I really was able to cheer when a team won a Stanley Cup. And it's not going to happen this year either. Dallas, this year's really testing my faith in the organization. And there's times where it is hard to cheer for Dallas. But I've cheered for Dallas since they were the Minnesota North Stars. I've cheered for them since 1981. So that means I'm still on this nauseating ride. 37 years later. At number 2, to the shock of no one, is Boston. At number 1, to the shock of no one, is Vancouver. No Stanley Cup here. Last Stanley Cup was in 2011 for Boston. And the question gets asked about 2011, so I'll answer it here. I wanted Vancouver to win. I thought Vancouver was going to win going into Game 6. Once they lost Game 6, I knew they were going to lose Game 7. The egos of Canuck fans made me kind of happy when Boston won, and it wasn't close. Because I heard a lot going into Game 7 about how Boston wasn't good enough, and Vancouver was a much better team, and I was like, if you guys watch the series at all, because Boston's kind of kicking the crap out of them, it just happens to be a 3 games tie, because Roberto Luongo stole 3 games. And those same people were complaining about, well, Luongo's the problem. Okay, so that's the 2011 storyline. There you go. Roughly half an hour. All 31 teams rated from my least favorite to my favorites. And you'll see underdogs all over. And for the teams that have won Stanley Cups recently, this is the first one they'd won since 72. And that was the only Stanley Cup they've ever won. Other than that, there's nothing. Nothing. One Stanley Cup, nothing. And this is why, if you jump on a bandwagon of a team I cheer for, you do so at your own peril. Thank you very much for watching. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. And this has been the 2018 edition of my favorite teams in the league.